Hello and welcome to the Boat Shed. My name is John and this boat behind me is Antidote. I'm an engineer and a sailor with the dream of fixing up this old boat to go sailing around the world. Now I have a lot of work to do first. Today we are diving into the mechanics on board Antidote. We're looking at the 35-year-old original inboard diesel engine, and stick around to the end of the video where we look at another ancient piece of mechanical wonder. Now, if you've been watching these videos for some time, you'll already know that we have a 90 horsepower Lehman on board. And the question with that engine is, what kind of condition is it in? It does have a lot of hours. These Lehmans are marinized tractor motors, and some will say that you don't have to start worrying about a rebuild until you're around 10,000 hours. But this old boat had a 40 amp DC refrigerator on board that I'm sure was run for extended periods of time at anchor at idle, charging the batteries. And that is really not what a diesel engine likes to see. They prefer to be more at 80% load or higher. So how do you assess an engine like this and determine if it's going to need a rebuild without tearing it apart? One thing that you can do, and people have mentioned this in the comments in the past, is get an oil analysis done. A good quality lab can tell you a lot about what's happening inside your engine based on an oil sample. Now, you don't just need to take my word for it. Joe, one of the senior analysts with Blackstone Laboratories, has agreed to stop by to shed a little light on the subject. We are here with Joe Adams in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Joe is here to fill us in on why oil testing. Joe, like my grandpa showed me, you rub it between your fingers, it's black, it doesn't smell too bad, it's not cloudy white. So, what else do I need to know about my oil?
Well, oil has always been more than meets the eye. And when you think about it, when an engine needs oil to do its job, it only makes sense that the oil can tell you about the engine it's taking care of. When it's in the process of cleaning and lubricating, it's picking up wear metals and contaminants, and it's putting the physical properties to the test as well. So, sending in a sample of the unused oil or used oil in this case allows you to look inside the engine without tearing it apart and understanding what's going on.
Okay, so what are the different things that I might find in this oil? Now, most of the people watching this, probably diesel engines, hopefully closed loop cooling systems,
Mhm.
not a lot of gas engines out there. If you do have an old Atomic 4, I really feel your pain. But let's focus in on there today. What are the main things that you're going to be finding in oil samples that we need to be looking out for, things we want to find, things we definitely don't want to see? What are they telling us?
Well, one quote that I'd take away from one of your videos, just to get into it, that I
Okay.
was enjoying just before this was that Murphy always shows up. And
Yes.
Murphy can show up in the engine oil in the form of poor wear, contamination from fuel, water, also an oil that's not holding up well, be that the result of excess heat. We can see that and say a high viscosity. We can see an oil filter that's not working effectively based on how much solid material is present. So really it gives you a rundown of how the engine is getting along, and if it's getting along poorly, why that might be. Is it because of water ingress? Is it because of fuel? And even when you talk about water, is it seawater or is it coolant? We can tell the difference based on the ratio of elements like sodium and potassium. So not only does it tell you how the engine is doing, but we want to go beyond that and give you some context into those numbers, what could be affecting it. And then, of course, if we have any information to pass along, helpful next steps the owner can take as far as addressing whatever issue may be ailing the motor.
Okay. Give us an idea. How many samples are you looking at any given day, week, month, year?
It's funny to even think about right now because it's never been more. So I think if I were to just conservatively estimate it right now, I mean we're north of 500, we're probably north of 600, and that's just per day. It's something that has only gone up every year I've been around, but this year exponentially. And I don't know quite why that is, but something is driving increased enthusiasm. And whether that is, say, owners who are wanting to be extra careful with their maintenance with how expensive used cars are, aircraft, marine owners who are just finding out about us, but it's some combination that is only causing that sample volume to go up.
We're dealing with a 90 horsepower motor here. I could probably get away with 65, 75. The sticker price on that will blow your hair back. So
Oh, I believe it.
testing oil to me seems like really good economy, especially when I have this giant refit and I don't have infinite time to sort everything out or just say rebuild the whole engine just for the sake of it. Part of the reason for that question was to understand what kind of background data do you have? Like I come to you with this first sample probably ever from this engine, maybe a previous owner sampled, assuming it's the first time you're looking at this engine. what kind of historical data do you have from your sample that can maybe help you understand this is similar to other engines in this category or this exact same make model? How can that help drive the discussion?
Yeah, so what we like to do is dial in the exact engine model that you're sampling. So if you send in a sample and you identify the model, we're going to go to our averages for that specific engine type, not necessarily the oil type, because while the additive package of various oils can vary, we find that really the key differences don't lie in what oil you're running, but the engine it's being run in. So we're going to have averages dedicated to that model, like in your case, the SP90. And then what we're going to do is look at how your sample compares mainly in the wear metals. We want to see if the metals in your oil, if they have a familiar shape, what's dominant is in this case, the SP90, copper tends to be the dominant metal, followed by iron, aluminum, so on and so forth. So we want to see in your sample, compared to the historical data we have, is your engine wearing in a typical manner? And if it's not, why that might be. So, for example, say you have a whopping amount of chrome in the oil, which is a ring metal, a chrome level in excess of aluminum, let's say, from the pistons or iron from the cylinder walls. That can be a clue that you have a cylinder area issue that needs to be addressed. Not to mention, if that chrome is coinciding with a lot of fuel dilution, that can also be a symptom of that problem. So, we want to see how your sample stacks up with what we expect from that engine. And also, if we see levels that are high, we want to view them in context. We want to understand, is this a wear in situation? Have you just made repairs that could impact the levels? And as such, we can tell you, hey, this does look like typical wear in, or it does not, or it looks like there's some other issue in these results. We will break down how it looks compared to what we expect, and then also going beyond that, if the levels are high or low, why that might be.
With my particular engine, we were sitting for quite a while. Do you recommend running the motor for 15 minutes? How important is that aspect?
So overall, you're not risking too much. The main thing is fuel. When an engine is, say, only idled briefly or started shortly before sampling, or if the boat's been sitting a while, then you can often run into fuel dilution. That doesn't come from a problem. It's mainly situational from the low RPM operation that these engines are accustomed to. So ideally, you get out there, whether it's a marine application or any other, allowing the fuel from startup to burn off, and then we can see, all right, is there fuel that's not related to startup, but more indicative of a problem like a stuck or leaking injector, some other issue with the fuel system? So, fuel is the main thing that you can avoid by doing that 15-minute run. However, the metals, though, are going to be pretty much as is. Oil holds everything in a pretty even suspension, so you don't need to really worry about shaking it up or running it to pick up a certain amount of metal in order to determine how that engine is doing. If you want a wear profile, you can get that with or without warming it up usually, but to avoid fuel, warming it up is the way to go.
Being as it is, I am a glutton for punishment and I enjoy a good challenge. We'll get this thing fired up and run it for about 15 minutes, try and get it off the bottom. Difficult to apply a lot of load here on the driveway, but we'll do our best and just keep that in mind when you look at our sample.
Absolutely. That's something we'd love to know about whenever you're filling out the slip. Sampling conditions are key to have on our side as well. Background info that can help explain a less than ideal result is always helpful.
So, Joe, for people that are working with marine diesel engines, what's the main thing that we need to be worried about or thinking of? Is there something that's different than a typical land-based engine that we should be aware of?
Not so much in the sense that engines tend to run well when they are contaminant free and when they have an ideal oil change interval and a routine maintenance plan that's keeping an eye on things. So that it's comforting in the sense that when you have an engine that is dialed in on an oil change interval that's not asking too much of the engine or oil that's being run, and you're keeping an eye on contaminants, making sure they're away from the engine oil, they're all a lot alike in that sense, in that you can anticipate good looking oil reports with that maintenance plan in tow. So keeping an eye out for contaminants and addressing them as they pop up, and again, just finding that oil change interval that is agreeable. And that can take a few samples. So it's important to exercise patience in some cases. Some people will want to run well past the OEM recommended interval, which Their engines can prove capable of that. Some people are very conservative. But whatever the case may be, sampling will tell you how often you should be changing the oil, whether or not you can stretch that interval. And once you've dialed that in and you're keeping an eye out for water and fuel and dirt, debris, and the rest of it, well, then you can just keep an eye on things every once in a while. Maybe you skip an oil change here or there. But of course, developing those trends and understanding how the engine's responding to the use it sees, it applies to marine diesels, it applies to any gasoline engine that's going down the road or an engine up in the air for that matter. It's just part of maintaining that routine maintenance that all engines need.
The sense I'm getting from you is that you're interested in helping people arrive at these sorts of conclusions, understanding what their problems are, and maybe finding that ideal interval instead of just getting a list of numbers and a link to where you can research this on Google. It sounds like you guys are really trying to provide a report and some guidance.
Mm-hmm. We want to meet them where they are. So whether they are an industry pro or an enthusiast or someone who is brand new to maintaining whatever it is they own, that report is for them. So the way we tailor it is in the comment. The comment section accompanies the results. And what we do is pay attention to who we're writing it for. Whatever the case may be, I want to meet them where they are, where their experience level is. And sometimes that takes sleuthing, just understanding what's being sampled, who's sampling it. If it's a marine surveyor, I'm probably going to have a different tone than someone who is the owner. We want to understand who we're writing it for, and that will tailor the approach in the comment, whether that means making as many suggestions as possible or knowing, hey, this guy's mechanic, he knows what to look for. We're going to tell him what may be there and he'll take it from there, or telling someone, hey, this looks like it might be a head gasket problem. Some of these models are known for that. You probably want to check into it. So it really requires a comprehensive approach of understanding the client, the engine, and what the oil's telling us.
It would be amazing if we could unpack that together, maybe in a future episode. So,
Oh, absolutely. Breaking down the results would be a lot of fun.
okay, cool. I think that'll be something fun to look forward to. Hopefully, you'll have more good news for me than bad. Joe, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you giving us an idea of why we might want to look to a company like Blackstone for some oil analysis.
Well, thank you, John. I'm excited to get to know you, get to know Living for Sale, and stay on the journey all the while. So we'll be back.
Great. Okay, well, let me go get some oil for you to look at then.
All right.
If you're interested to see the entire conversation, including the craziest thing that Joe's ever seen in an oil sample, then you can check out the full-length video up here. I'll put a link down below to the Blackstone website where you can pick up a free oil sample kit, as well as links to Joe's Slick Talk podcast. For now, what do you say we try and get some oil out of this old engine? Now, I really wish that I would have taken this oil sample a couple of years ago when I was motoring the boat over to the marina for its final haul out, but I didn't think about it at the time, and so we are doing it here on the hard. So there's a couple of major things we want to check before we try and start this motor. First of all, the cooling system on board. So we'll check the cooling on the engine itself, and then the raw water system. Since the boat's not sitting in the water, we're going to need to find a solution to provide some water to the engine. Secondly, we need to make sure that we have a good supply of diesel. I've emptied the tanks, so we're going to need to find a workaround to supply diesel without any air bubbles. And lastly, we want to make sure that the electrical system, including the starting battery and alternator, are ready to go. Let's start with that. We have two alternators on this boat. We have a standard output alternator for the engine starting battery and then a higher output alternator for the house bank. Now the house bank has been disconnected, all those batteries are gone. And if you've ever had the pleasure of switching your battery selector switch to the off position while you're running your engine, you'll know that alternators do not like to be connected to no load. In fact, they like to let all the smoke out. You want to keep that smoke inside your alternator. So for the auxiliary house bank, one way to make sure it's turned off would be just to disconnect the two belts that connect it to the crankshaft. Even easier way though, since this one is externally regulated through this device here, would be just to take off the field wire. And the field wire tells the alternator when to come on and when to go off. And that's going to power this whole thing down. It'll just basically freewheel when the engine starts. And that's perfect. We don't want the house bank charging up. So by disconnecting the alternator, we're going to be in good shape. Now the main alternator for the starting battery appears to be internally regulated. So we'll leave that one hooked up to the battery and let it run as it normally would. The start battery for Antidote is an old AGM. I've got it off the charger now and it looks like it's good to go. These AGM batteries are great. This one has survived a lot of neglect on my behalf. Nigel Calder said it best that lead acid batteries don't die, they're murdered. And I murdered a couple of 4D lead acid batteries that were on this boat when I bought it, as it's been sitting for a little bit. This one survived though. It does great. It still has lots of juice left. We're going to use it to kick over the motor here and get this engine started. Don't expect to save any weight with an AGM battery. This thing still weighs a ton, but there's no liquid sloshing around. There's some other benefits. We can talk about that later, but for now, let's get this thing hooked up. It's not uncommon on older boats to find a lot of wiring running all over the place. And on one hand, although it is nice to have everything neatly organized and running in looms and bundles, and that's probably what we'll want to do when we're done with this project, it is kind of nice that currently there's wires running sort of every which way loose, because it does make it easier for me to trace out where everything is going without having to break all those bundles open and get out a tester. I can actually just trace it with my hand. So now that we've got the engine starter battery installed and all hooked up, we're going to trace it up to the battery selector switch, take a look at that and make sure we know what everything is doing. We've been able to verify this is the starter. The second one in is the power to the anchor, which we're going to shut off with a switch underneath here. The last wire is to the alternator itself for charging the starting battery. This is the supply that comes from the battery. So all the wiring's in place, so let's focus on the cooling system now for the engine. Could I run this engine without the raw water cooling system? Yeah. Since it's a closed loop cooling system, the engine would probably be fine for quite some time before it started to overheat. The problem that I would have is that the raw water pump is probably going to get damaged doing that. There's a rubber impeller inside there that is not going to appreciate being run dry, nor the face seal inside the pump that keeps the water on one side of the unit and not on the other. So you could expect to replace both of those parts if you run it dry for too long. Add to that, the exhaust elbow, the water lock muffler, and all the components after there are used to having cold water pumped into them while the engine is running to keep all those temperatures stabilized. I don't want it to overheat any of this stuff, so we're going to supply water to this engine. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. It usually comes through this intake strainer on the hull of the boat just below the galley here. We're going to have to bypass this. We'll stub a length of hose onto the intake strainer after we remove it from the old through hull, and we'll put it into a bucket. We'll have about 5 gallons in there, and we can replenish that as we go. I think it should be able to keep up with that. We will see. We'll have to keep an eye on that. That'll allow us to get water into the intake strainer and into the rest of the system. Before we do all that, let's make sure that the closed system on the engine looks good and check out the impeller, make sure that it's in a reasonable condition. Okay, so the impeller looks pretty good. All of the vanes are laying flat. I don't see any chips. Before we put this back in, we're going to put a little bit of hand soap on the back of this as well as on the impellers there. Just rub a little bit of hand soap in. That's just to keep things lubricated while it gets up to speed and the water is being pumped into it. Moving on now to the fuel system. I fought for far too long with the hoses on the port side fuel tank, trying to get those off of the hose barbs, and resorted to just cutting them off flush at the ends. I fashioned a pickup tube from some leftover copper and dipped all this into some clean diesel in a 5-gallon can. It was evident that I was going to have to do a little bit of bleeding on this, seeing as the port side fuel filter is already showing quite a bit of air in it from when I drained the tanks. What I probably should have done and will do now is when I'm done with the fuel system, I'll turn off all of the return lines so that all the fuel stays in the system. Now, the usual way to bleed the air out of the fuel system on this engine is with a very small lever mounted to the mechanical fuel pump that's buried far down on the starboard side of the engine. It's quite a reach to get there. I can do it, but it's no fun, and it takes a long time to get the air out. Now, when I bought the boat, knowing this, I installed a mechanical fuel pump on a bypass circuit, and allows me to run the fuel very quickly and remove air from a system like this. It's a nice thing to have, especially if you're in a pinch, so we'll use this to prime the system. The nice thing about having the 3-way valve on this system is that I can remove the pump from the system so I don't have any fuel restrictions when the pump isn't needed. Do a quick oil check. So we're kind of firmly in the middle there. Always a good plan when you're checking oil to wipe the dipstick clean and then reinsert it so you make sure you get a super clean reading. Now we see we're closer to 3/4 full here. That's what we did there, and the oil level looks good after settling for quite a while. The systems all seem good to go now on the engine. Before we give it a little bump and try to just get it to turn over, I like to sometimes put a bar on an engine and give it a little spin by hand just to move it a little bit first. So we're going to just put this rather small crescent wrench on the end of the crankshaft pulley, turn it in the direction of rotation. You should be able to get a little bit of movement, but an engine that's been sitting for a long period of time, you maybe just want to check it before you hit it with the starter because you could do some damage if it is seized up. Don't think we're going to have any problem with this. It's just for interest's sake. Okay, that all looks pretty good. I think we're ready to hit the start button on this, so let's give it a shot and see how we do. Okay, we're gonna give it a quick little bump just to see if the proof of concept is good. See if she'll just start to crank. She turns over. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't at least a little bit nervous to start up this old lumpy diesel with the boat sitting on stands here on the side of my house. Made sure all the stands were nice and tight, and before starting I placed this 2-foot level on the cockpit sole just so I'd have a way to quickly measure at a glance if there was any funny business going on. Okay, it looks like we finally got everything sorted out. We're ready to bring this old hunk of iron to life, so let's do this. First attempt, and that's a big no. So hopefully it's just a little bit of air left in the system. I didn't quite bleed out all the way. Took another turn at the bleeder here, and I was able to get a few more bubbles out of the top of the fuel filters. So hopefully that's the issue. Right on, the engine roars back to life after more than 2 years of sitting on the hard here, and that feels pretty good. So this feels like the right time for me to ask you to hit that like button. Thanks guys, I really do appreciate it. Now you might be thinking that's an awful lot of smoke coming out of the engine, and you would be right. These engines have a reputation for smoking at cold start, and although it did continue to smoke somewhat, we're gonna have to see what that might be about. There's a lot of old diesel still running through this engine. It has been sitting for a while, but let's see what the oil analysis says and go from there. Once I started to see the coolant temperature coming up off the bottom and we'd run for almost 15 minutes, I decided to call that a day. We stopped the motor and then started to draw the oil sample. So I'm using my Pella oil vacuum pump here. This actually came with the boat. It's a great tool. When you're drawing oil though through a small straw, even when it's been heated up a little bit, it does take a while to fill up this container. So the footage here is not too exciting. Skipping ahead, we see the oil sample here all ready to go. Blackstone Labs sends you these envelopes, so it's really easy. You just pop it in the mail and then they will tell you what's going on with your sample. So while we're waiting for our sample results, let's move on over to something else I've been waiting to show you. This is Antidote's original Nilsson Maxwell V3000 windlass. This mechanical brute is still working great when I pulled it off, and many of them are all around the world doing the same. Although this windlass was functioning just fine at raising the anchor when I took it off the boat, evidence is clear from looking at the outside that it has not been particularly well cared for. I don't suspect it had ever been dropped before to open it up, expose it, and look inside, check the condition of the oil. I think if I would have been able to send an oil sample in for this, Joe, that would have put me on your Hall of Fame, I'm sure, for the most metal parts per million, because this thing was a bit of a mess. Now, we're going to save that adventure for next video. It's a really cool machine. I think you're going to enjoy looking into this, and you'll also get to see what's inside this box. So I'm hoping that with what's in here, we're going to get this machine up and running better than it ever has been before. Be sure to hang around for more of these videos. We're going to be rebuilding that windlass and some other fun stuff coming up soon. I have some exciting announcements to get to in the next couple of videos. If you've enjoyed this one today, it would mean a lot to me if you'd hit that like button. It really does help with the channel, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I'd like to give a really big thanks to all the folks over on the Patreon group that help make this channel a possibility. People whose names are appearing on the screen now go the extra mile to make sure that this channel keeps being produced, and I appreciate you all very much. If you'd like to join the Patreon group, you get access to some behind-the-scenes content. I'll send you a couple of stickers for the channel, and it would just be great to get in touch with you. If you're new to the channel and you'd like to get caught up from the very beginning of the refit, you can hit the playlist right up here. If you want to catch the full-length talk with Joe that we did, you can look at the full version down here, and if you would like to subscribe for more of this video content in your inbox, that button is for you. See you guys next time. Cool. You always want to try and drop it to the bottom of the engine compartment if you can.